Welcome to this video on the components of blood. Um, so far we have had a look at the heart, the structure of the heart, um, in a little bit more detail, and we also have looked at the blood vessels and the role that the blood vessels play in moving the blood around the body, and particularly applying that sort of knowledge to athletes and people taking part in sport. So now we're going to zoom in a little bit closer and look at the components of blood. So what in fact is in the blood, and try and relate that in particular to how athletes can benefit from those different components of the blood. So that's really where we're going to start. Um, so follow the video through and we'll take you through this short video. Now, blood is made up of different things, and we have to have an understanding about different elements of the blood that flows through our body, and also be able, of course, because we're doing GCSE PE, be able to apply that to different athletes. So within the blood, to start off with, we have these components you can see here. We've got red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. Red blood cells now, extremely important when we're talking about athletes. Why is that? Why am I saying it's extremely important? Well, these red blood cells are the things that carry the oxygen from the lungs to the muscles and removes carbon dioxide from the muscles and takes it back on that loop which we looked at before. So red blood cells carry oxygen. So this is absolutely vital, because we know that as athletes and taking part in sport, and even just taking part in daily activities, we need oxygen to get to our muscles in order for them to work properly. Now, how does this happen? Well, inside the red blood cells, we have a compound called hemoglobin. So that's a real key word here, hemoglobin. Now, what this does is it bonds to the oxygen and it forms a little um, compound called oxyhemoglobin, and this is what transports that oxygen around the body in those blood vessels which we looked at before. So absolutely vital to an athlete. Let's say an athlete that's a centre midfielder in football, position that I used to play. I need to make sure that I can get that oxygen into my blood and attach it to the red blood cells as I'm charging up and down, back and forth all over the pitch, because that oxygen needs to go to my muscles so I can respire aerobically and not start building up that lactic acid which we don't want in our body. So this is absolutely vital to athletes, any sports performers, really vital. Well, we know that our blood isn't just made up of red blood cells. We also have other components in the blood, um, such as white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. So again, absolutely vital role that white blood cells play. Why is this? Because these are the little things that defend against disease and they prevent an infection after injury. We know that sport um, can be dangerous. There is an element of risk to do with sport, and so if we have any sort of infection because of an injury, because of a disease, white blood cells in the blood are like the little soldiers that come out and attack those disease and those infections that are in our body. So white blood cells, absolutely vital to that. So they come out, they surround those things that we don't want, those diseases, and they fight them off and get rid of them. It's really important. You think about applying this to an athlete. Well, if we didn't have white blood cells, or they weren't working efficiently or effectively, it means that in one instance, an athlete could get sick, and this can stop them from training. This can also, if they do play while they're ill, they performance will reduce, performance will drop. But also, let's think about some sports in particular where there's a higher risk of infection, such as definitely contact sports, martial arts sports such as boxing, kickboxing, UFC, mixed martial arts, where there is a high likelihood that these athletes, both in training and in fights, are going to get cut. Now, anytime we get cut, obviously opens up the body to a higher risk of infection because those infectious pathogens can come into our body and into our blood. So these white blood cells help to keep us healthy, fight the diseases like the common cold, and enable us to train, enable us to play, and reduce that risk of infection. Platelets. So platelets look a little bit like this, almost kind of like some chewing gum. They're sticky little components, and they're formed in the bone marrow, and the primary role of platelets is to help to clot the blood. So when we get cut, these are released, um, attach themselves to the area where we have been injured and help to stop that bleeding, or at least try to reduce the amount of bleeding. So these will form a scab over a cut and stop us from bleeding. Again, there's many sports that you can use as an example. If this was to come up in a question, you could talk about rugby, you could talk about boxing, even football. We know you can get lots of cuts from football, maybe high tackles with studs. So platelets are very, very important in this. Remember, sports like boxing, the referee can call off a fight if they feel that the cut is too bad and is continuing to bleed. Not only that, but a cut above the eye, for example, could continue to bleed into the eye. That obviously reduces that athlete's ability to see their opponent, ability to avoid taking shots. So platelets, a good example would be boxing. Now plasma is what makes up the majority of our blood. So it's a yellowish color liquid that all blood floats in, and it's 90% water, and it helps in the circulation. So plasma really is the river that all the white blood cells, the platelets, the red blood cells flow in. So it's important that we have healthy plasma. And if it is, think about this, if it is 90% water and it helps that blood to circulate around the body to deliver that oxygen, to remove that carbon dioxide, this again goes back to hydration for sport and making sure that you're very hydrated, because if you're not, obviously this will impact that system of blood flow around the body. So let's just remember that point as well when we approach any GCSE questions. And here we go, here's a little test tube, and we can kind of see now the makeup of different elements that we've talked about so far in this video. Very, very simple. Obviously, if you took blood out of your body, it won't look like this straight away, but this is what you can get through a process in a lab. So you can see the plasma makes up 55%, white blood cells, platelets, less than 1%, so very, very small portion of the blood in our body is made up of those two things. And red blood cells, extremely, extremely important to an athlete, makes up about 45% of that sample of blood that we can see there. That's great. I think that's all for me. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously just subscribe, like the video, and subscribe to the channel, and look forward to seeing you back here again.